The concert hall was supposed to be empty at 2 a.m. That's what the security logs said. That's what the cleaning schedule confirmed. That's what every rational person in the city would assume about the Rossi Opera House on a Wednesday night in late November. But Vincent Castellano didn't build his empire by making assumptions. He stood on the third-floor balcony, hidden in shadows that cost him $200,000 in bribes to the City Planning Commission to ensure this particular vantage point remained private. Below him, the main concert hall stretched out like a cathedral to wealth and culture. Crimson velvet seats arranged in perfect rows. Crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. A stage that had hosted legends, presidents, and once, very memorably, a peace negotiation between three warring families that had ended with everyone still breathing. Tonight, Vincent was here because his accountant had flagged irregularities in the opera house's maintenance budget. Someone was skimming. They always were. And Vincent had learned long ago that the best way to catch a thief was to watch them when they thought no one was looking. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The main doors opened with a metallic groan that echoed through the empty space. Vincent's hand moved instinctively toward the gun beneath his jacket, then relaxed when he saw who entered. A janitor. Male, maybe late 20s, wearing a gray uniform that had seen better days. He pushed a cleaning cart loaded with supplies, moving with the efficient economy of someone who'd done this route 1,000 times before. Nothing suspicious. Nothing worth Vincent's attention. He was about to leave, to let his security team handle the financial investigation, when the janitor did something unexpected. He stopped. Right in the center of the main aisle, the janitor stopped pushing his cart and stood perfectly still, staring at the stage like a pilgrim seeing Mecca for the first time. His head tilted slightly, as if he was hearing music that only he could perceive. His fingers twitched at his sides in a pattern that Vincent recognized but couldn't quite place. Then the janitor walked onto the stage. Vincent's interest sharpened. Employees weren't allowed on the stage during cleaning hours. Union rules. Insurance liability. The kind of regulations that Vincent's lawyers had helped write specifically to protect the opera house's most valuable assets. But this janitor moved across the polished wood like he belonged there. Like the stage was calling to him, and refusing was impossible. There was a piano. A Steinway Model D grand piano that cost $187,000 and was used exclusively by world-renowned performers. It sat stage left, covered by a protective cloth that was supposed to remain in place unless a concert was scheduled. The janitor removed the cloth with reverent hands, folded it carefully, set it aside like it was sacred silk instead of industrial fabric. Then he sat down on the bench. Vincent leaned forward in the darkness, his entire body tense with anticipation he couldn't explain. There was something about the way the janitor positioned himself, the way his shoulders relaxed even as his spine straightened, the way his hands hovered over the keys without touching them like a prayer before communion. When the first notes filled the concert hall, Vincent forgot how to breathe. It was Beethoven. Piano Sonata No. 14 in C-sharp minor. Moonlight Sonata. But this wasn't some amateur interpretation. This wasn't a street performer hoping for spare change or a music student practicing for exams. This was mastery. The janitor's fingers moved across the keys with the kind of precision that took decades to develop. Each note was perfect, crystalline, hanging in the air like individual diamonds before melting into the next. The first movement started slowly, hauntingly, filled with the kind of melancholy that reached into your chest and squeezed your heart until tears came unbidden. Vincent had heard this piece performed by some of the greatest pianists in the world. He'd sat in this very balcony during galas where tickets cost $10,000 and champagne flowed like water. He'd watched men and women in tuxedos and evening gowns bow to thunderous applause after playing Beethoven. None of them had sounded like this. The janitor played like the music was being torn from his soul, like every note cost him something precious, and he was willing to pay the price anyway. His eyes were closed, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm, completely lost in the world he was creating with his hands. The first movement gave way to the second. Allegretto. Lighter, faster, but still carrying that undercurrent of darkness that Beethoven had woven into every measure. The janitor's fingers flew across the keys now, his entire being focused on the conversation he was having with the instrument. Vincent realized he'd moved closer to the balcony railing without consciously deciding to do so. His hand gripped the polished wood hard enough that his knuckles turned white. Something was happening inside his chest, something unfamiliar and uncomfortable and entirely unwelcome. He was moved. Vincent Castellano, who'd ordered deaths over dinner and never lost sleep, who'd built an empire on fear and respect and the unwavering certainty that emotion was weakness, who trained himself to see people as assets or liabilities, never as anything that could touch the carefully constructed walls around his heart. He was moved by a janitor playing piano at 2 a.m. The third movement erupted like a storm. Presto agitato. Fast, furious. Technically impossible for anyone except the truly gifted. The janitor's hands became a blur across the keys, pulling out cascades of notes that built and crashed and built again like waves against rocks. This was where lesser pianists failed. This was where practice and talent diverged, where those who simply knew the notes separated from those who understood the music. The third movement of Moonlight Sonata was a test that revealed everything about who you were when the technical demands exceeded what your training could carry. The janitor passed the test. More than passed it. He made the piano sing and scream and whisper and shout. He dragged beauty and fury and desperate hope from keys and hammers and strings until the concert hall itself seemed to vibrate with the force of what he was creating. Vincent found himself gripping the railing with both hands, leaning forward into the darkness, afraid to breathe, because even the sound of air moving through his lungs might disturb this moment. His heart was racing. His palms were sweating. Every nerve in his body was alive and focused on the man below who was destroying and creating a universe with nothing but his hands. When the final notes faded into silence, the janitor sat perfectly still. His hands remained on the keys, his shoulders rising and falling with deep breaths that suggested he'd just run a marathon. Slowly, like someone waking from a dream, he lifted his hands from the piano and placed them in his lap. He didn't open his eyes immediately. He sat there in the silence, and Vincent could see his lips moving, whispering something. Prayer, maybe, or gratitude, or simply words to anchor himself back in reality. Then the janitor stood, carefully replaced the protective cloth over the Steinway, picked up his cleaning supplies, and walked off the stage like nothing extraordinary had happened. Vincent watched him disappear through the service entrance, listened to the sound of the cleaning cart's wheels fading into the distance, stood alone in the darkness of the third-floor balcony, and tried to process what he just witnessed. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco, his head of security. Found the skimmer. Junior accountant. Already handled. You still at the opera house? Vincent looked down at the stage where a janitor had just performed magic, then typed back. Send me everything we have on our cleaning staff. Tonight. He had questions. Too many questions. And Vincent Castellano always got his answers. The file arrived at Vincent's penthouse apartment at 3:47 a.m. Marco had been thorough as always. Complete employment records for all maintenance and cleaning staff at the Rossi Opera House. Background checks. Social security numbers. Addresses. References. The kind of information that let you know everything about a person except who they really were. Vincent poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25 and settled into his leather chair, the files spread across the desk in front of him. He started with the janitors, who worked the overnight shift. 3 total. 2 women in their 50s who'd been with the company for over a decade. 1 man, David Chun, age 28, hired 6 months ago. Previous employment, various temp agencies, food service, retail. Education, incomplete. Vincent pulled out the background check and read more carefully. David had been accepted to the Berkshire Conservatory of Music at age 17 with a full scholarship. Piano performance major. Instructor's notes indicated exceptional talent and once-in-a-generation technical skill. He completed 2 years of the 4-year program with perfect grades. Then he disappeared. No graduation. No transfer to another school. Just a sudden absence that the file noted but didn't explain. The next entry in his employment history was 4 years later, working as a dishwasher at a chain restaurant in Brooklyn. Vincent picked up his phone and called Marco. Boss, Marco answered on the first ring, alert despite the hour. You get the file? Tell me about David Chun. Papers rustled in the background. Chinese-American. No criminal record. No family that we can find. Lives alone in a studio apartment in Greenpoint. Keeps to himself. Building supervisor says he's quiet. Pays rent on time. Never causes problems. The conservatory, Vincent said. What happened there? Val doesn't say. Want me to dig deeper? Vincent looked at the conservatory logo printed at the top of the transcript. Berkshire was prestigious, exclusive, the kind of place that turned talented students into world-renowned performers. Getting in with a full scholarship meant David Chun had been special. Walking away meant something had broken. Yes, Vincent said. And Marco? Be discreet. He hung up and returned his attention to the file. There was a photograph clipped to the employee badge copy. David Chun had a face that was easy to overlook. Asian features, dark hair that needed cutting, eyes that looked down instead of at the camera. The kind of face that learned early to be invisible, to move through the world without drawing attention. But Vincent had seen those hands create miracles at 2 a.m., had heard the music pouring from a soul that understood beauty and pain in equal measure. There was nothing invisible about David Chun when he sat at a piano. Vincent finished his whiskey and made a decision that would change both their lives. The next night, Vincent returned to his private balcony at the Opera House. Same time, same shadows, but tonight he wasn't there to catch a thief. He was there to watch a janitor. David arrived at 1:58 a.m., 2 minutes early for his shift. He went through his cleaning routine with methodical efficiency. Vacuumed the aisles, wiped down the armrests, checked the bathrooms. Everything by the book, everything according to protocol. Vincent checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. He wondered if last night had been a one-time occurrence. A moment of weakness, where David's discipline had cracked and the music had spilled out despite his better judgment. At 2:23 a.m., David stopped cleaning. He stood in the center aisle, staring at the stage with that same expression of longing Vincent had seen the night before. His fingers twitched at his sides. His breathing changed, becoming deeper, more deliberate. He was fighting it, Vincent realized. Fighting the urge to walk onto that stage and touch those keys. The battle lasted 3 minutes. Then David set down his cleaning supplies and walked toward the piano like a condemned man approaching the gallows, knowing what awaited but unable to choose differently. Tonight he played Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. It was a piece that required an orchestra, that was meant to be performed with dozens of other musicians supporting the soloist. But David played it anyway, his hands finding both the orchestral parts and the solo lines, weaving them together in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Vincent closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. He'd spent 30 years building walls around himself, walls that kept people out, that protected him from the weakness of caring, that ensured nothing, and no one could ever hurt him the way his father's death had hurt him when he was 16. David's playing was demolishing those walls brick by brick. The music built to a crescendo that filled the concert hall with such beauty that Vincent felt something crack inside his chest. Something that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten it could thaw. When David finished playing, he didn't leave immediately this time. He sat at the piano, his head bowed, and Vincent saw his shoulders shake. The man was crying. Silent tears that he wiped away with the back of his hand before standing and carefully covering the Steinway again. Vincent's phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Got the information you wanted. You're not going to like it. He waited until David had left the concert hall before pulling up Marco's message. The full report came through as a PDF. Vincent read it in the darkness of his private balcony, and with each paragraph, his jaw tightened further. David Chun had left the Berkshire Conservatory because his grandmother, who'd raised him after his parents died, had gotten sick. Stage 4 cancer. No insurance. He dropped out to work 3 jobs to pay for her treatment. She died anyway, 6 months later, alone in a hospice because David had been working a double shift and couldn't get there in time. After that, David had disappeared into the kind of life where survival took precedence over dreams. He'd moved from city to city, job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots or let anyone close enough to hurt him again. The piano had been locked away inside him, a treasure too painful to touch because it reminded him of everything he'd lost, everything he'd given up, everything he could never get back. Except at 2 a.m., when he thought no one was watching, David Chun couldn't help himself. He had to play. Had to let the music out before it killed him from the inside. Vincent understood that better than he cared to admit. He closed the file and looked down at the empty stage. In his mind, he could still hear the Rachmaninoff echoing through the concert hall. Could still see David's hands flying across the keys with the kind of desperate passion that came from having nothing left to lose. Marco's text had ended with a question. "What do you want to do about this?" Vincent typed back, "Set up a meeting. Tomorrow night. Here." "With who?" "David Chun." There was a pause before Marco responded. "Boss, he's a janitor. Why do you want to meet him?" Vincent looked at his reflection in the dark window glass. Saw the man who built an empire on fear and violence. The man who made people disappear and never looked back. The man who'd forgotten what it felt like to be moved by something beautiful. Because, he typed slowly, "I want to give him his life back." David Chun had been summoned to exactly 0 meetings in his life that didn't end with him being fired. So when the night shift supervisor found him at 11 p.m. and told him that Mr. Castellano wanted to see him in the main concert hall, David's first thought was, this is it. Someone finally noticed that he'd been touching the piano. Someone complained. Now he'd lose this job like he'd lost all the others. The supervisor, a nervous man named Jerry who sweated through his shirt even in winter, wouldn't meet David's eyes. "He's waiting for you on the stage. Don't keep him waiting." David had heard stories about Vincent Castellano. Everyone in the city had. The man who owned half of downtown, whose name appeared on charity foundations and construction contracts, and, if the rumors were true, in sealed court documents that involved words like racketeering and conspiracy. People who disappointed Vincent Castellano had a tendency to relocate suddenly, or disappear entirely. David walked through the empty concert hall with his heart hammering against his ribs. The stage lights were on, creating a pool of brightness in the otherwise dark space. And standing in the center of that light, wearing a suit that probably cost more than David had earned in the past 6 months, was Vincent Castellano. He was taller than David had expected, broader in the shoulders, but it was his face that made David stop walking. Because Vincent Castellano didn't look angry. He looked curious, like David was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "David Chun," Vincent said. Not a question. A statement. "Yes, sir." David's voice came out steadier than he felt. "I'm sorry if I've done something wrong. I can explain. How long have you been playing my piano?" The question hit David like a physical blow. He considered lying, denying it, making up some excuse that might save his job. But something in Vincent's eyes told him that lies would be worse than the truth. 2 months, David said quietly. "Maybe 3. I know I shouldn't have. I know the rules. I just..." He trailed off, unsure how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "Just what?" "I just needed to." The words came out raw, honest. "I tried not to. I try to just do my job and leave. But when I'm here, when I see the piano, it's like I can't breathe until I play. Like there's music stuck inside me, and if I don't let it out, I'll suffocate." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the Steinway and removed the protective cover. "Show me." David's throat went dry. "Sir, I want to see you play. Now." This was some kind of test. Or maybe a game. Either way, David was trapped. He could refuse and definitely get fired. Or he could play and probably get fired anyway. He chose the music. David sat at the piano bench and let his hands find the keys. He didn't ask what Vincent wanted to hear. He simply played what was in his heart. Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, No. 2. It was beautiful and sad and achingly lonely. The kind of peace that spoke to the hours between midnight and dawn, when the world slept and you were left alone with your regrets. David poured everything into those notes. Every lost dream. Every moment of grinding poverty that had stolen his future. Every time he'd walked past a concert hall and heard music he should have been performing but never would. When he finished, silence filled the space between them. David kept his eyes on the keys, unable to look up and see judgment in Vincent Castellano's face. "Where did you train?" Vincent asked finally. "Berkshire Conservatory. 2 years. I had to leave." "Why?" David's hands clenched into fists on his lap. "My grandmother got sick. I was the only family she had. She'd raised me after my parents died, so I came home to take care of her." "And after she died? How did he know?" But of course he knew. Men like Vincent Castellano knew everything about everyone who entered their orbit. After she died, I didn't go back. Couldn't afford it anymore. The scholarship was only good for 4 years, and I'd already used 2. Would have needed loans for the rest. Seemed stupid to go into debt for a degree in something that wouldn't pay the bills. Vincent walked closer, and David forced himself to look up. The expression on the older man's face was unreadable. "Do you know what I heard when you played just now?" Vincent asked. David shook his head. "I heard someone who understands that music isn't about the notes. It's about what happens between the notes. The silence. The space where emotion lives." Vincent paused. "I've hired world-renowned performers for the stage, pianists who've played for presidents and kings. And not one of them has played with the kind of soul I heard from you." David didn't know what to say. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. "I'm going to make you an offer," Vincent continued. "And before you answer, I want you to understand something. I don't make offers like this. Ever. But I'm making an exception because I believe in recognizing rare talent when I see it." "What kind of offer?" Vincent pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to David. "Open it." Inside was a check. David looked at the amount and felt the world tilt sideways. It was enough to cover 2 years of tuition at Berkshire. Enough to pay rent and buy food. Enough to focus entirely on music instead of survival. "I don't understand," David whispered. "I'm offering you a choice. You can take that money and go back to school. Finish your degree. Become the pianist you were meant to be. Or you can stay here, cleaning my concert hall and playing my piano at 2 a.m. when you think no one is watching." David looked at the check, then at Vincent. "Why would you do this? You don't know me." "I know enough." Vincent's eyes were intense, penetrating. "I know what it looks like when someone has given up on their dreams. And I know that some people deserve a second chance. What do you want in return?" Vincent smiled, and it was the first genuine smile David had ever seen from him. "I want you to play. Not for me. Not for anyone else. But for yourself. Because the world has too few people who can create beauty and too many who destroy it. I'd rather be someone who helps the former than enables the latter." David's hands were shaking. This couldn't be real. People like Vincent Castellano didn't just hand out life-changing opportunities to janitors who broke the rules. There has to be a catch. No catch. But there is a condition. Vincent's expression grew serious. "If you take this money, you finish what you started. No dropping out. No giving up when things get hard. You commit to becoming the pianist your talent deserves. Do we have a deal?" David looked at the check again. Looked at the Steinway that had been his only solace for the past 6 months. Looked at Vincent Castellano, who somehow saw past the gray janitor's uniform to the person underneath. "Why?" David asked again. "Why would you care about someone like me?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "Because 12 years ago, I sat in this concert hall and watched my father die from a heart attack during intermission of La Boheme. And in the chaos, in the panic, while everyone was screaming and running, the orchestra's pianist kept playing. She played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata while the paramedics worked. She played like music could hold back death itself." He paused, lost in memory. "It didn't save him, but it gave me something to focus on besides my father's face turning blue. It gave me a moment of beauty in the worst moment of my life." Vincent's eyes met David's. "I've never forgotten that. Never forgotten that sometimes music is the only thing that stands between us and complete darkness." David felt tears burning in his eyes. "I heard you. 2 nights ago. I didn't know anyone was here. I know. That's when I decided to do this." The envelope felt impossibly heavy in David's hands. It represented everything he thought was lost forever. His future, his dreams, his reason for existing beyond survival. "I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice." "Already handled. You're released from your contract effective immediately." Vincent pulled out a business card and handed it to David. "That's my personal number. You call me if you need anything. Tuition problems, housing issues, anything that might interfere with your studies." "Understood?" David nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "One more thing," Vincent said. "Next month, this opera house is hosting a gala fundraiser. 500 guests. Politicians, business leaders, everyone who matters in this city. I want you to perform. I'm not ready. You're more than ready. And David? Vincent's smile returned. It's not a request. The envelope sat on David's kitchen table for 3 days before he finally opened a bank account and deposited the check. Even then, part of him expected it to bounce. Expected someone to call and tell him there'd been a mistake. Expected to wake up and discover the entire meeting with Vincent Castellano had been a stress-induced hallucination. But the money cleared. The check was real. And on Monday morning, David found himself standing outside the admissions office at Berkshire Conservatory for the first time in 6 years. The building looked exactly the same. Red brick, tall windows, the kind of architectural dignity that came from 100 years of producing world-class musicians. But David felt different, older, worn down by life in ways that his classmates, fresh from high school and private music lessons, could never understand. Can I help you? The receptionist was new, young, probably a work-study student earning credits by answering phones and filing paperwork. I need to speak with someone about re-enrollment, David said. I attended here 6 years ago, left in the middle of my sophomore year. She typed something into her computer, her expression shifting from polite disinterest to surprise. David Chun. Yes. Please wait here. Dean Morrison wants to see you immediately. That couldn't be good. Dean Morrison had been the head of the piano department when David left. She'd been the one who'd tried to talk him out of dropping out, who'd promised to hold a scholarship as long as possible, who'd looked genuinely heartbroken when he walked away. The office was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the practice rooms where students spent hours perfecting their craft. David could hear scales and arpeggios filtering through the walls. The familiar sounds made his chest ache with longing. David Chun. Dean Morrison stood in her doorway, older now, gray threading through her dark hair, but her eyes still sharp and assessing. I thought I'd never see you again. I didn't think you would either. She gestured him into her office. It was exactly as he remembered. Posters of famous performances. A small upright piano in the corner. Shelves overflowing with sheet music and books about theory and composition. I received a rather interesting phone call last week, she said, settling behind her desk. From Vincent Castellano's attorney, informing me that you would be returning to complete your degree and that all expenses would be handled by Mr. Castellano's foundation. David shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know he was going to call ahead. David, do you understand who Vincent Castellano is? I've heard the stories. Then you know that his foundation is how he launders his reputation. Charity galas and scholarship funds, so people forget about the rest. She leaned forward. What I need to know is why. Why would a man like that take an interest in you? David explained about the janitor job, about playing the piano at 2 a.m., about Vincent appearing on stage and making an offer that seemed too good to be true. Dean Morrison listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You were the most talented student I'd ever taught, she said finally. When you left, I told myself it was a waste. That somewhere in the world was a pianist who could have been extraordinary, but life got in the way. She paused. I'm glad I was wrong. I'm glad you're getting a second chance. So I can re-enroll. Your scholarship is waiting. Same terms as before. Full tuition, stipend for living expenses. You'll need to audition again, of course. Policy. But given what I remember of your playing, that shouldn't be a problem. Relief flooded through David. When? Friday. 2 p.m. Prepare 3 pieces. Different composers, different periods. Show me you haven't lost what made you special. David stood to leave, then hesitated. Dean Morrison? Mr. Castellano wants me to perform at a gala next month. For 500 people. I told him I wasn't ready. She smiled. And what did he say? That it wasn't a request. Then I suggest you start preparing. Because if Vincent Castellano wants you to perform, you're going to perform. And David? Her expression grew serious. Make sure you're extraordinary. Men like him don't accept anything less. The practice rooms at Berkshire were available to re-enrolling students, even before official acceptance. David spent every available hour in room 247, the same room he'd used 6 years ago. It had a Yamaha grand piano, slightly out of tune in the upper register, but still infinitely better than anything he'd touched since leaving. He started with basics, scales, arpeggios, the technical foundation that kept fingers nimble and muscle memory sharp. It had been 6 years since he'd practiced properly, and his hands felt clumsy at first. Like reuniting with an old friend after too long apart, unsure if the connection still existed. But slowly, the magic returned. By the 3rd day, his fingers remembered patterns his brain had forgotten. By the end of the first week, he was playing pieces he'd learned as a teenager, feeling them come back to life under his hands. For the audition, he chose carefully. Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C major for technique, Debussy's Clair de Lune for musicality, and Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor for power and emotion. The day of the audition, David arrived an hour early. The auditorium was smaller than the main concert hall at the Opera House, but it still felt enormous. 3 faculty members sat in the front row, clipboards ready, expressions neutral. Dean Morrison was in the center. She gave him a small nod. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Chen." David sat at the piano and took a breath. Then he began to play. The Bach flowed from his fingers like water. Clean, precise, every note exactly where it needed to be. He could see one of the faculty members nodding slightly, making notes. The Debussy was dreamlike, floating, each phrase a brushstroke painting moonlight on water. This was where musicality mattered more than technical perfection, where interpretation revealed who you were as an artist. But it was the Rachmaninoff that showed them what he could really do. The Prelude in C-sharp minor was nicknamed the Bells of Moscow for its deep, resonant opening chords that sounded like church bells tolling. David attacked those chords with everything he had, pulling massive sound from the instrument, making the entire room vibrate. Then came the cascading passages, the impossible technical demands, the moments where lesser pianists' fingers simply gave up. David's hands flew across the keys, never hesitating, never faltering, building to a climax that made the final chords ring out like Judgment Day. When he finished, silence filled the auditorium. Dean Morrison was smiling, actually smiling. "Welcome back to Berkshire, Mr. Chen. Classes start Monday." Moving into student housing felt surreal. David's assigned dormitory was designed for graduate students, single rooms, shared common areas, people who took their music seriously enough to practice until 2 a.m. without complaints. His room was small but clean. A bed, a desk, a narrow closet. The window overlooked the practice building, and David could see lights burning in individual rooms where students were already working. He was unpacking his few belongings when someone knocked on his door. A young woman stood in the hallway, Asian, maybe 22, holding a plate covered in aluminum foil. "Hi, I'm Sarah Lynn. I live 2 doors down. I heard we got a new student and thought I'd bring cookies. Welcome wagon thing." David accepted the plate. "Thanks. I'm David. I know. Dean Morrison mentioned you in seminar yesterday. Said we should all be prepared to step up our game because she'd recruited someone special." Sarah leaned against the doorframe. "Piano, right?" "Yeah. Me too. Performance track." "You?" "Same." She studied him with open curiosity. "You're older than most incoming students. Career change? Something like that?" If Sarah was bothered by his evasiveness, she didn't show it. "Well, if you need anything, let me know. Where to find good coffee, which professors to avoid, the best practice rooms. I've been here 3 years. I know all the secrets." After she left, David tried one of the cookies. Chocolate chip, still warm. When was the last time someone had done something nice for him without wanting anything in return? He couldn't remember. That night, David lay in his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd start classes. Theory, history, performance seminar. All the things he thought were lost forever. And in 3 weeks, he'd stand on stage in front of 500 people and perform for Vincent Castellano. The thought terrified him. Vincent's text came on Sunday evening, 3 days before the gala. "Dinner tomorrow. 7 p.m. Address below. Don't be late." The restaurant was called Salvatore's, tucked into a neighborhood where buildings had iron security gates and cars had alarms that actually worked. David arrived 15 minutes early, uncertain about protocol. "Did you show up on time for dinner with a crime boss?" "Early, fashionably late." The maitre d' took one look at him and smiled. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Castellano is waiting for you." Please, follow me. They walked through the main dining room to a private area in the back. Vincent sat at a table set for two, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than David's entire wardrobe. He was reading something on his phone, but looked up when David approached. You're early. I like that. Didn't want to keep you waiting. Sit. Vincent gestured to the chair across from him. Have you eaten? Not yet. Good. Because Salvatore makes the best osso buco in the city, and you look like you could use a proper meal. A waiter appeared immediately, pouring wine and water, setting down bread that was still warm from the oven. Vincent ordered for both of them in rapid Italian, then settled back in his chair. How's school? Good. Classes started last week. It's different than I remember. Different how? David considered his answer. I'm older than everyone else. They're all coming straight from high school or undergraduate programs. Fresh. Eager. I feel like I've lived an entire life they can't understand. You have, Vincent said simply. That's an advantage, not a weakness. Maybe. The first course arrived. Some kind of salad with ingredients David couldn't identify, but that tasted incredible. Vincent ate with the same precision he seemed to apply to everything. Never rushed, never wasteful. The gala is in 3 days, Vincent said after a while. Are you ready? I don't know. I've been practicing 8 hours a day, but performing for 500 people. David shook his head. That's different than playing for an empty concert hall. What are you going to play? Chopin, Ballade No. 1 in G minor. And Liszt, La Campanella. Big pieces. Impressive. The kind of thing people expect at galas. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Change it. What? Change what you're playing. I don't want impressive. I want honest. David set down his fork. I don't understand. The people coming to this gala don't care about music. They care about being seen at the right events, making the right connections, writing checks that get their names in programs. Vincent's eyes were intense. But there will be a few people there who actually listen, who understand what it means to hear something real. I want you to play for them. What should I play instead? Play what you played for me the first night, when you thought no one was watching, when it was just you and the music and nothing else mattered. David's throat felt tight. Those aren't showy pieces. They're emotional. Personal. Exactly. Vincent leaned forward. David, I didn't give you that money so you could become another trained performer playing what's expected. I gave it to you because when you play, I hear something that most people spend their entire lives looking for and never find. What's that? Truth. The word hung between them. David thought about all the hours he'd spent choosing pieces for the gala, practicing technical passages until his hands cramped, trying to prove he belonged on that stage. If I play what you're asking, David said slowly, people might think I'm not good enough, that I can't handle the difficult repertoire. Let them think whatever they want. The people who matter will understand. The main course arrived. Osso buco that fell off the bone, risotto that was perfectly creamy, vegetables that had been roasted until their natural sweetness emerged. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Can I ask you something? David said finally. Go ahead. Why did you really do this? Give me the money, set up the re-enrollment, arrange for me to perform. You said it was because you heard me play, but... He trailed off, unsure how to finish the question. Vincent set down his wine glass. My father used to say that power was only worth having if you used it to create something that outlasted you. Buildings, businesses, legacy. But he also said that sometimes the most important thing you can create is possibility. He paused, and David could see him choosing his words carefully. I've spent 20 years building an empire on fear and violence. I'm good at it, probably better than I should be. But lately I've been thinking about what I'm leaving behind, what people will remember after I'm gone. Vincent's expression was unreadable. Then I heard you play, and I realized that maybe the best thing I could create wasn't another building or business deal. Maybe it was giving someone like you a chance to become who you were meant to be. David felt something crack in his chest. That's a lot of pressure to put on a janitor. You're not a janitor anymore. You're a pianist. Act like it. The night of the gala, David arrived at the opera house 3 hours early. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely button his tuxedo, a gift that had arrived at his dorm room 2 days earlier with a note. Dressed properly. VC, the concert hall was transformed. Flowers everywhere. Crystal champagne flutes lined up on white tablecloths. Staff in formal uniforms, making final adjustments to centerpieces and lighting. David walked onto the stage and stared out at the 500 empty seats that would soon be filled with the city's elite. Politicians, business leaders, people who made decisions that shaped thousands of lives. And somewhere in that crowd would be Vincent Castellano, watching to see if his investment had been worth it. "You must be David Chun." He turned to find an elderly woman approaching. She wore an evening gown that probably cost more than a car, and jewelry that could fund a small country. But her smile was warm. "I'm Margaret Rothstein. I'm on the Opera House board. Vincent told me we'd be featuring a special guest performer tonight." "Yes, ma'am. That's me." She studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You're nervous." "Terrified, actually." "Good. That means you care. The performers who aren't nervous are usually the ones who bore me." She glanced at the piano. "What are you playing?" David told her. She raised her eyebrows. "Interesting choice. Not what I'd expect for a gala debut." Mr. Castellano suggested I play what was honest instead of what was impressive. Margaret laughed. "That sounds like Vincent. He's never cared much about what people expect." She patted David's arm. "I'll be in the front row. Don't disappoint me." The guests started arriving at 6:30 p.m. David watched from backstage as the concert hall filled with designer gowns and expensive suits. Champagne flowed. Conversations buzzed. Camera flashes captured arrivals for social media and society pages. At 7:15 p.m., Vincent arrived. He wasn't alone. A woman accompanied him. Stunning, elegant, wearing a dress that made every other woman in the room look underdressed. They moved through the crowd like royalty, stopping to greet people, accepting handshakes and air kisses with practiced ease. But Vincent's eyes kept scanning the room, looking for something, or someone. When his gaze found David standing in the wings, he nodded once, a gesture that somehow communicated both encouragement and expectation. At 7:30 p.m., the house lights dimmed. The crowd settled into their seats. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with a too-white smile, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. Before we begin dinner, we have a very special performance. Tonight we're privileged to hear from David Chun, a pianist who's returning to Berkshire Conservatory after a 6-year absence. Please welcome him to the stage." Polite applause, the kind that was automatic at events like this. David walked onto the stage, and the applause faded. 500 faces stared up at him. 500 people who'd paid $1,000 a plate to be here, most of whom would rather be eating dinner than listening. To some unknown pianist. He sat at the Steinway, adjusted the bench, let his hands rest on the keys. Then he closed his eyes and remembered why he'd started playing in the first place. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because music was the only language he'd ever found that could express everything words couldn't touch. He began with Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. Posthumous, one of the composer's most melancholic pieces, written in his youth but not published until after his death. It was grief distilled into notes, loneliness made tangible, the sound of someone reaching for beauty in darkness. David played it the way he'd learned to play when his grandmother was dying, when the only thing that made the hospital smell bearable was imagining himself somewhere else, somewhere beautiful, somewhere that pain couldn't touch. The concert hall went absolutely silent. Not the polite quiet of people trying to be respectful, but the breathless hush of an audience that had been ambushed by genuine emotion. He followed the Nocturne with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, all 3 movements. The same piece he played the first night Vincent heard him. But tonight it meant something different. Tonight it was gratitude made manifest. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing I was worth saving." The third movement built to its impossible climax, and David's hands flew across the keys with the kind of technical mastery that came from years of practice meeting years of pain. When the final notes crashed through the concert hall, he could hear someone in the audience gasp. He finished with Rachmaninoff's Vocalize, originally written for voice, but transcribed for piano in a way that made the instrument sing like a human throat. It was the piece his grandmother had loved most. The last thing she'd asked him to play before the morphine took her too far away to hear. David played it with his eyes closed, tears streaming down his face, not caring who saw or what they thought. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was confession. This was absolution. This was every moment of the past 6 years compressed into 12 minutes of music. When the last note faded into silence, David kept his hands on the keys, kept his eyes closed, tried to remember how to breathe. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite. It wasn't automatic. It was the sound of 500 people who'd been sucker-punched by a beauty they hadn't expected. People were standing, shouting. Someone near the front was crying. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. David opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. Found Vincent in the 3rd row, standing with everyone else. But Vincent wasn't applauding. He was just watching David with an expression that made something warm bloom in David's chest. Pride, maybe, or recognition. The look of someone who'd gambled everything on a long shot and watched it pay off beyond his wildest expectations. Margaret Rothstein appeared at the edge of the stage, still clapping, mascara running down her cheeks. "Young man," she called up to him, "that was the most honest performance I've heard in 40 years of attending concerts. Brava!" The master of ceremonies returned to the stage, grinning. "Ladies and gentlemen, David Chun. Let's hear it one more time." The applause crescendoed. David stood and bowed, overwhelmed, uncertain what to do with his hands or his face or the emotion, threatening to crack his chest open. Finally, the noise died down enough for people to return to their seats. David walked off stage on shaking legs, his tuxedo shirt soaked with sweat, his hands trembling from exertion and adrenaline. Vincent was waiting for him in the wings. "That," Vincent said quietly, "was exactly what I asked for. I cried on stage. I know. So did half the audience." Vincent smiled. "You gave them something real, David. Something they'll remember long after they've forgotten the name of the charity they donated to tonight." Before David could respond, people started appearing backstage. Margaret Rothstein with a dozen of her wealthy friends, all wanting to meet the pianist who'd made them feel something. Reporters asking for quotes. The opera house director practically vibrating with excitement about future performances. Vincent handled them all with diplomatic efficiency, making introductions, deflecting the more aggressive questions, creating space for David to breathe. After 20 minutes, he pulled David aside. "There's someone who wants to meet you." He led David to a quiet corner where a man in a wheelchair waited. Late 60s, thin from illness, but his eyes were bright and alert. "David Chun," Vincent said. "This is Dr. James Harrison. He's the head of the Philharmonic Auditions Committee." David's heart stopped. The Philharmonic, the orchestra that launched careers. Getting an audition with them was nearly impossible. Actually winning a contract was the dream of every pianist who'd ever touched a keyboard. Dr. Harrison extended his hand. "Mr. Chun, that was extraordinary. I'd like to invite you to audition for our Young Artist program. If you're selected, you'd perform as a guest soloist with the orchestra. 3 concerts next season. Full scholarship, professional mentorship, the works." David couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was hearing. He looked at Vincent, who was watching with careful neutrality. "I'd be honored, sir. Thank you. Vincent has my contact information. Have him set up the details." Dr. Harrison smiled. "I look forward to hearing you play again." After he left, David turned to Vincent. "Did you arrange that?" "No. That was all you." Vincent's expression was unreadable. "I gave you the opportunity. What you did with it was entirely your own." The gala continued around them. Dinner was being served in the adjoining ballroom. People were laughing, drinking, enjoying an evening that would probably raise $500,000 for the opera house. But David couldn't move, couldn't quite believe that his life had just changed again, in ways he was still trying to comprehend. "Come on," Vincent said, placing a hand on David's shoulder. "You need to eat something. And there are a lot of people in that ballroom who want to throw money at you." The next morning, David woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Sarah from down the hall had heard about the performance from a friend who'd been at the gala. Dean Morrison wanted to schedule a meeting. His theory professor had sent an email with the subject line, "That was you." But it was the text from Vincent that made David's chest tight. "You kept your promise. You finished what you started. I'm proud of you." VC, David sat on his narrow dorm bed staring at those 3 sentences and realized that something fundamental had shifted. For 6 years, he'd been surviving, moving from job to job, city to city, existing in the spaces between other people's lives. He'd convinced himself that dreams were luxuries for people who hadn't learned how cruel the world could be. But Vincent Castellano had looked at a janitor playing piano at 2 a.m. and seen something worth saving. Had taken a risk on someone who'd given up on himself. And now David had a future again. Not the one he'd imagined at 18, bright-eyed and naive, but something better. Something earned through pain and loss, and the kind of determination that came from having nothing left to lose. His phone buzzed with another message. This time from an unknown number. "This is Margaret Rothstein. I want to commission you to perform at my granddaughter's wedding. Name your price. And David, please play like you did last night. That's what we need more of in this world." David smiled and typed back, "I'll play for free. Just promise me you'll actually listen." Her response came immediately. "Deal. Vincent was right about you. You're special." 3 weeks later, David stood in Vincent's office for the first time. It was nothing like he'd expected. No ostentatious displays of wealth. No intimidating leather furniture or walls covered in expensive art. Just a clean, efficient space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive desk covered in papers, and photographs of people David assumed were Vincent's family. "I wanted to give you something," Vincent said, walking to a cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a folder and handed it to David. Inside were legal documents. David read through them slowly, his confusion growing with each page. "I don't understand." "This is a trust," Vincent finished. "Enough to cover your expenses through graduation and 1 year beyond. No strings attached. No expectation of repayment. Just support so you can focus entirely on your music." "Vincent, you've already done so much. I know what I've done. And I know what you've become because of it." Vincent's expression was serious. "David, I told you that night at the restaurant that power was only worth having if you used it to create something that outlasts you. You're my legacy, not the buildings or the businesses or any of the other things I've built. You." David felt tears burning in his eyes. "Why me?" "Because you reminded me that there's still beauty in this world worth protecting. Because you showed me that second chances aren't just for people like me who have money and power. Because when I heard you play, I remembered what it felt like to care about something more than survival." Vincent walked to the window and looked out at the city below. "My father died in that concert hall. For years, I hated that place, avoided it. But then I bought it because I couldn't stand the thought of someone else owning the space where the most important person in my life took his last breath." He turned back to David. "And then you came along, playing piano at 2 a.m. like music could heal the broken parts of the world. And I realized that maybe the concert hall wasn't a tomb. Maybe it was a temple. A place where beauty still lived, even when everything else was dying." David didn't know what to say. "How do you thank someone for giving you back your soul?" "I'm going to make you proud," he said finally. "You already have." 6 months after the gala, David Chun stood backstage at Symphony Hall, waiting to perform as a guest soloist with the Philharmonic. His hands were steady now. The trembling that had plagued him during his first performance had been replaced by something else, confidence born from countless hours of practice, and the knowledge that he belonged here. The audition with Dr. Harrison had gone better than David could have imagined. He'd played Prokofiev's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the repertoire, and the selection committee had offered him a contract before he'd even left the building. 3 performances, full orchestra backing. His name on programs distributed to thousands of music lovers across the city. Tonight was the first. Sarah had come to watch, along with half his classmates from Berkshire. Dean Morrison sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Margaret Rothstein occupied her usual box seat, surrounded by friends she'd been telling about her discovery for months. And somewhere in the audience, Vincent Castellano was watching. They'd fallen into an unexpected friendship over the past 6 months. Dinners every few weeks at Salvatore's, where Vincent would ask about school and David would share stories about demanding professors and the peculiar social dynamics of conservatory life. Sometimes they'd talk about music, sometimes about business. Often they'd sit in comfortable silence, two people who understood what it meant to rebuild your life from ruins. Vincent had never asked for anything in return for his generosity. Never leveraged David's gratitude for favors or connections. He simply watched from a distance as David transformed from a janitor who played piano in secret to a musician who commanded stages. But tonight felt different. Tonight was David's chance to prove that Vincent's faith hadn't been misplaced, that the investment of money and time and belief had created something worth celebrating. The orchestra was already on stage, tuning their instruments. The concertmaster was checking with the first violins, making sure everyone was ready. The conductor, a formidable woman named Maestro Chun, no relation, was reviewing her score one final time. 5 minutes, Mr. Chun, the stage manager called. David closed his eyes and let himself remember the journey that had brought him here. The foster homes, his grandmother's illness, the years of poverty and invisibility. That night at the opera house when he'd broken the rules and played a piano that wasn't his. And Vincent, standing in the shadows, listening to music he wasn't supposed to hear. You're going to be brilliant. David opened his eyes to find Vincent standing beside him. He was dressed impeccably, as always, but there was something different in his expression tonight. Pride, yes, but also something deeper. Something that looked almost like love. You came backstage, David said. Wanted to see you before you went on. Make sure you weren't spiraling into panic. Vincent smiled slightly. You're not, are you? No. I'm ready. I know you are. Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. I wanted to give you this. Open it later, after the performance. But I wanted you to have it tonight. David took the box, feeling its weight in his palm. What is it? A reminder of where you started and how far you've come. Vincent's eyes were intense. David, whatever happens out there tonight, remember that you've already won. You took your life back. Everything else is just victory laps. Before David could respond, the stage manager appeared. Mr. Chun, we're ready for you. Vincent squeezed his shoulder once, then disappeared back into the audience. David walked onto the stage to applause that washed over him like a wave. The orchestra members nodded in greeting. Maestro Chun smiled and gestured for him to sit at the piano, a magnificent Steinway that had been carefully prepared for tonight's performance. He settled onto the bench and looked out at the audience. 2,000 people. The concert hall was packed to capacity, with standing room tickets sold out days ago. This was what success looked like. This was the dream he thought was dead. Maestro Chun raised her baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments, and David placed his hands on the keys. The concerto began with the orchestra alone, establishing the themes that David would later explore and expand. He waited for his entrance, counting measures in his head, feeling the music build around him. Then it was his turn. His hands came down on the keys with crystalline precision, and suddenly the piano wasn't just another instrument in the orchestra. It was the voice around which everything else revolved. David played with the technical mastery that years of training had developed, but also with the emotional depth that only suffering could teach. The first movement was playful, almost mischievous. Prokofiev had written it to sound deceptively simple, but the technical demands were brutal. David navigated them effortlessly, his fingers dancing across the keys while maintaining perfect communication with the orchestra. The second movement slowed to a haunting meditation. This was where the piece revealed its soul. David played with the kind of vulnerability that made listeners hold their breath, each note hanging in the air like a question that might never be answered. And then the third movement exploded into organized chaos. Fast, furious, demanding everything from both soloist and orchestra. David's hands flew across the keys, pulling out cascades of notes that should have been impossible but somehow weren't. The music built, and built until it felt like the entire concert hall might shatter from the force of it. When the final chord rang out, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the audience erupted. People were on their feet, shouting, applauding with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for rock concerts. The orchestra members were tapping their music stands with their bows, the traditional gesture of respect from one musician to another. David stood and bowed, overwhelmed. He gestured to the orchestra, sharing the recognition. Maestro Chun was grinning, clearly thrilled with how the performance had gone. But David's eyes were scanning the audience, looking for one person. He found Vincent in the 10th row, standing like everyone else, but not applauding, just watching David with an expression that made everything, all the pain, all the struggle, all the years of survival worth it. The after-party was held in the Symphony Hall's reception room. Donors and board members mingled with orchestra musicians and select audience members. Champagne flowed freely. People who'd never spoken to David before suddenly wanted to know everything about him. Where did you train? Who were your teachers? What are you playing next season? David answered their questions with practiced grace, but his attention kept drifting to Vincent, who stood near the windows with Margaret Rothstein. They were deep in conversation, occasionally glancing in David's direction. Finally, Dr. Harrison approached with a man David didn't recognize. Late 40s, expensive suit, the bearing of someone used to being important. David, I'd like you to meet Richard Torres. He's the artistic director of the International Piano Competition in Brussels. David's heart skipped. Brussels was one of the most prestigious competitions in the world. Winners launched international careers, toured globally, recorded with major labels. Mr. Chun, Torres said in accented English, I came to hear you tonight on Dr. Harrison's recommendation. I must say, I was not disappointed. Thank you, sir. I would like to invite you to compete in Brussels next year. We have a limited number of spaces, and they're highly competitive, but I believe you have what it takes to make a serious impression. This was bigger than the Philharmonic, bigger than anything David had dared to imagine. I'd be honored. Excellent. My assistant will send you the application materials. I look forward to hearing you play again. Torres shook his hand and moved on to greet other guests. David stood there, trying to process what had just happened. Brussels, international competition, the kind of opportunity that could change everything. Congratulations. He turned to find Vincent beside him, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Vincent handed him one. You heard. Everyone heard. Torres isn't exactly subtle. Vincent smiled. How does it feel? Surreal. 6 months ago I was cleaning concert halls. Now I'm being invited to compete in Brussels. And you're surprised? Yes. No. I don't know. David took a sip of champagne. Part of me keeps waiting to wake up and discover this was all a dream. Vincent's expression grew serious. It's not a dream, David. This is your life now. The life you've earned through talent and determination and refusing to give up even when everything was falling apart. I didn't refuse to give up. I did give up. You're the one who pulled me back. I gave you an opportunity. You're the one who turned it into this. Vincent gestured to the room full of important people who all wanted a piece of David's future. Don't diminish what you've accomplished. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the party swirl around them. Did you open the box yet? Vincent asked. David had forgotten about it in the chaos after the performance. Not yet. Been a little busy. Open it now. David pulled the small box from his jacket pocket and lifted the lid. Inside was a key, old-fashioned, brass, attached to a leather fob with an address embossed on it. What is this? The address to a studio apartment 3 blocks from Berkshire. Fully furnished. Yours for as long as you need it. Vincent's voice was quiet. I know dorm life isn't ideal for practicing. Too many distractions. This place has a piano, soundproofing, everything you need to focus on your work. David stared at the key. Vincent, I can't accept this. You've already given me too much. You can and you will. Because I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Vincent's tone left no room for argument. David, you have a real shot at Brussels, at an international career. But that only happens if you have the right environment to develop your craft. Consider this an investment in your future. Why do you keep doing this? Why do you care so much about what happens to me? Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made David's chest tight. When my father died, I inherited his empire, his businesses, his connections, his reputation. Everything he'd built over 40 years became mine overnight. He paused, but I also inherited his debts. Not financial debts, moral ones. People he'd hurt, families he'd destroyed, The cost of building something powerful through fear. Vincent looked at David directly. I've spent 20 years trying to figure out how to balance those scales, how to create something good that might offset all the bad. And then I heard you play, and I realized this is how. By helping someone who deserves a chance actually get one. By using my resources to build instead of destroy. I'm just one person. You're not just anything. You're proof that redemption is possible. That broken things can be fixed. That sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to be part of something beautiful instead of something ugly. David felt tears burning in his eyes. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me. Just keep playing. Keep creating beauty in a world that desperately needs it. That's all I ask. Margaret Rothstein appeared beside them, her eyes bright with champagne and excitement. Vincent, David, you must come meet the ambassador from Austria. He's talking about organizing a tour of European concert halls, and I think David would be perfect. Vincent gestured for David to follow her. Go. Network. This is part of the job now. As David was pulled into another round of introductions and business card exchanges, he kept glancing back at Vincent, the man who'd seen potential in a janitor, who'd given him not just money but belief, who'd refused to let David's talent die in obscurity. The party continued for another 2 hours. By the time David finally escaped, his head was spinning with opportunities and offers and possibilities he was still trying to process. Vincent walked him out to the street, where his car was waiting. Get some rest, Vincent said. You have class tomorrow, and I'm guessing you didn't sleep much last night. Probably won't sleep much tonight either. Too wired. Then go to your new apartment. Play piano until you're tired. The neighbors won't complain. I made sure of that. Vincent smiled. The address is in the financial district. Safe neighborhood. Everything you need is within walking distance. David looked at the key in his hand, then at Vincent. You know I'm never going to be able to repay you for all of this. I don't want repayment. I want you to succeed. There's a difference. They stood on the sidewalk, the city alive around them. Traffic noise, distant sirens, the sounds of people living their lives. Vincent, David said quietly, when you heard me play that first night, what did you really think? Vincent considered the question. I thought I was hearing someone who understood that music isn't an escape from pain. It's a way to transform pain into something meaningful. And I thought that if I could help that person, maybe some of the things I've done wrong in my life might matter a little less. You're not as bad as you think you are. I'm exactly as bad as I think I am. But maybe I'm also capable of being better. That's what you taught me. Vincent's driver opened the car door. But before getting in, Vincent turned back to David. One more thing. There's someone I'd like you to meet. My daughter, Isabella. She's 7. Takes piano lessons but hates practicing. I thought maybe if she met someone who actually made music feel important, it might change her perspective. David felt something warm bloom in his chest. Vincent wanted him to meet his family. To be part of his life, beyond the professional relationship they'd maintained. I'd love to meet her. Good. Come to dinner next Sunday. 6 p.m. I'll text you the address. Vincent climbed into the car, then rolled down the window. And David, tonight was extraordinary. Your grandmother would be proud. The car pulled away, leaving David standing on the sidewalk with a key to his new apartment and a heart so full it felt like it might burst. The apartment was perfect. Top floor of a converted brownstone, with exposed brick and tall windows that let in natural light. The piano was a Yamaha Baby Grand, positioned perfectly for acoustics. There was a small kitchen, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser. But what made David's breath catch was the bookshelf in the living room. It was filled with sheet music, every composer he'd ever mentioned loving during his dinners with Vincent. Rare editions, complete collections, pieces he dreamed of playing but never thought he'd own. There was a note taped to the bookshelf in Vincent's precise handwriting. A library worthy of a serious musician. Make good use of it. VC. David sat at the piano and ran his fingers over the keys. They were perfectly in tune, the action responsive and smooth. This was an instrument that had been carefully maintained by someone who understood what musicians needed. He began to play. Not Prokofiev or Rachmaninoff or any of the impressive repertoire he'd been mastering. Instead, he played the simple melody his grandmother used to hum while cooking dinner. A Chinese folk song whose name he'd never learned but whose tune was burned into his memory. He played it over and over, letting the notes fill the apartment, letting himself feel the weight of everything that had happened. The loss, the survival, the unexpected redemption. And for the first time in 6 years, David Chin cried without shame. Not tears of grief or pain, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. For Vincent's belief in him, for the second chance he'd been given, for the future that was unfolding in ways he never could have predicted. When he finally stopped playing, the sun was rising. Golden light streamed through the windows, painting everything in warmth. David's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Heard about Brussels. You're insane. Proud of you. Coffee later. Another text from Dean Morrison. The conservatory wants to feature you in our promotional materials. Can we discuss? And one from Vincent. Hope you slept well in your new place. See you Sunday. Isabella is excited to meet you. David smiled and typed back to Vincent. Didn't sleep at all. Too busy playing. Thank you for everything. The response came immediately. You earned it. Now go get some rest. You have a competition to prepare for. Sunday dinner at Vincent's house was nothing like David expected. The address led to a gated estate in the suburbs, with grounds that went on for what seemed like miles. Security guards checked his ID at the gate, but their demeanor was friendly rather than intimidating. The house itself was massive but warm. Children's toys scattered in the front yard, a basketball hoop over the garage, wind chimes hanging from the porch that created soft music in the breeze. Vincent answered the door himself, wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt that made him look almost normal. Almost like he wasn't one of the most powerful men in the city. David, come in. Hope you're hungry, because Maria made enough food to feed an army. The interior was beautifully decorated but lived in. Family photos everywhere. Art that looked like it had been chosen for love rather than investment. The smell of cooking filling every room. A woman appeared from the kitchen. Dark hair, warm eyes, wiping her hands on a dish towel. You must be David. I'm Maria, Vincent's wife. We've heard so much about you. She pulled him into a hug before he could respond. It was maternal, genuine, the kind of embrace that made you feel instantly welcome. Vincent won't stop talking about your performance last week. Says it was the best thing he's heard in years. He's being generous. He's being honest. My husband doesn't exaggerate about music, about business maybe, but never about art. Maria smiled. Come meet the children. They're very excited. She led him to a living room where 3 kids were sprawled on the floor playing a board game. 2 boys, maybe 10 and 12, and a little girl with dark curls who looked up when David entered. Isabella, Vincent said gently. This is Mr. Chen, the pianist I told you about. Isabella stood slowly, studying David with intelligent eyes that reminded him of her father's. You're the one who plays when he's sad? The observation was so unexpected, so insightful, that David didn't know how to respond. Vincent knelt beside his daughter. Where did you hear that, Principessa? You told Mama. After you came home from the concert. You said he plays like someone who knows what it means to be sad and found a way to make it beautiful. Maria and Vincent exchanged glances. Clearly they hadn't realized Isabella was listening. That's true, David said, crouching to Isabella's level. I do know what it's like to be sad, and playing piano helps me feel better. Does that make sense? She nodded seriously. I get sad sometimes too, but when I play piano, it just makes me more frustrated because I'm not good at it. Can I tell you a secret? Isabella leaned closer. Everyone who's ever played piano felt frustrated at first. Even the really famous pianists. Even me. The difference between people who quit and people who keep going isn't talent. It's deciding that making beautiful music is worth all the hard work. How do you know if it's worth it? David thought about his grandmother, about the years of poverty and loss, about Vincent giving him a second chance. You know it's worth it when you realize that life without music feels like something's missing. Like there's a part of you that only wakes up when you're playing. Isabella considered this. Can I hear you play? Isabella, Maria said gently, Mr. Chin is our guest. We shouldn't. I'd love to play for you, David interrupted. He looked at Vincent, who nodded toward a room off the main hallway. The music room had a beautiful Steinway grand piano Not as large as a concert grand, but perfect for a private home. There were also a violin, a cello, and a guitar. This was a family that took music seriously. Isabella climbed onto the piano bench beside David. "What are you going to play? What do you want to hear?" She thought for a moment. "Something that makes you happy." David smiled and began to play. Not a classical piece, but a jazz standard his grandmother used to love. Take 5 by Dave Brubeck. Playful, rhythmic, filled with joy. His hands danced across the keys, and he could see Isabella's expression transform from skepticism to wonder. When he finished, she was grinning. That was fun. Music should be fun, especially when you're learning. "Your dad told me you take lessons." "Yeah, but my teacher is really strict. She makes me play scales forever and I hate it." "Scales are important. They're like learning the alphabet before you can write stories. But maybe after you practice your scales, you could learn something fun too. Something that makes you smile." Isabella looked at her father, who was watching from the doorway. "Daddy, can I learn jazz piano?" Vincent's expression softened. "If that's what you want, Principessa, we'll find you a teacher who specializes in jazz." "And can Mr. Chin teach me sometimes?" David felt his chest tighten. This little girl, who'd never met him before, was asking him to be part of her life, trusting him with something precious. "I'm not a teacher," David said carefully, "but I could show you some things. If your dad thinks that's okay." Vincent nodded. "I think that would be wonderful." The rest of the evening was filled with laughter and good food. Maria's cooking was incredible. Homemade pasta, fresh bread, desserts that tasted like love in edible form. The boys, Michael and Anthony, asked David about performing in front of huge audiences and whether he got nervous. "Always," David admitted. "But I've learned that being nervous just means you care about doing well. It's not a bad thing." After dinner, Vincent walked David to his car. "Thank you for coming. And for spending time with Isabella. She doesn't warm up to people easily, but she clearly likes you. She's a great kid. They all are." Vincent looked back at the house, where warm light spilled from the windows and the sounds of his family filtered into the evening air. "I don't talk about them much. Professional hazard. The less people know about my family, the safer they are." "I understand. But you're not people, David. You're—" Vincent paused, searching for the right word. "Your family too now, in the ways that matter." The statement hit David like a physical force. Family. He hadn't had family since his grandmother died. Hadn't even let himself hope that he might find it again. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just know that this door is always open to you. Maria and the kids, they're all rooting for you. We all are." David got in his car, and Vincent leaned down to the window. "Brussels is in 8 months. That's not a lot of time to prepare." "I know. You're going to need help. Coaching, accompaniment for practice, someone to give you honest feedback." Vincent pulled out his phone. "I'm going to connect you with someone. Best piano coach in the country. She's expensive, but worth every penny." "Vincent, I can't keep letting you pay for everything." "Yes, you can. Because this isn't charity anymore, David. This is investment. I believe you're going to win Brussels. And when you do, when you're touring internationally and recording albums and living the life you were meant to have, you're going to remember that someone believed in you. And maybe someday, you'll do the same for someone else." "I will. I promise. I know you will. That's why I chose you." The 8 months before Brussels passed in a blur of intensive practice and coaching. Vincent's recommended coach, Dr. Elena Volkov, was a former concert pianist who transitioned to teaching after a hand injury ended her performing career. She was demanding, brilliant, and utterly uncompromising about excellence. "Again," she'd say after David finished a passage he thought was perfect. "You're rushing the second theme. It should breathe more. Feel the space between the notes." David would play it again, and again, and again until Elena finally nodded with satisfaction. But she also understood what drove him. During one particularly brutal session, where David couldn't seem to get a difficult passage right, she stopped him. "Why are you playing this piece?" "Because it's required for the competition." "No. Why are you playing it? What does it mean to you?" David thought about Vincent giving him a second chance, about Isabella's trust, about the future that was unfolding because someone had believed in him. It's about transformation, he said slowly. About becoming something you didn't think was possible. Then play that. Play the transformation. The notes are just notes until you give them meaning. He played it again, and this time it was different. This time the music told a story. Elena smiled. Better. Much better. Now do it again, but even more. Vincent came to several of the coaching sessions, sitting quietly in the back of the studio. He never offered advice or criticism, that was Elena's job. But his presence was a reminder of why David was doing this, of what was at stake. 3 months before Brussels, David performed another concert with the Philharmonic. This time it was Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, a piece that combined classical technique with jazz sensibilities. The concert hall was sold out again, and the reviews the next day used words like virtuosic and transcendent. Margaret Rothstein threw a party to celebrate, inviting everyone who mattered in the city's cultural scene. David spent the evening being photographed with donors and board members, his face aching from smiling. But the moment he treasured most was when Vincent pulled him aside late in the evening. 2 months until Brussels. How are you feeling? Terrified. Excited. Ready. Good. Because I have something to tell you. Vincent's expression was serious. I'm coming with you. To Brussels. David stared at him. What? You didn't think I'd let you face the biggest moment of your career alone, did you? I'll be there. Front row. Just like always. Vincent, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Besides, Maria's been wanting to visit Europe for years. We're making a family trip out of it. The kids are excited. David felt his eyes burning. Your whole family is coming. Isabella insisted. Says she needs to be there to cheer you on. Vincent smiled. Hope that's okay. It's more than okay. It's... David couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't articulate what it meant to know that Vincent's family, his family now, would be there to witness either his greatest triumph or his most devastating failure. You're going to win, Vincent said with absolute certainty. I know that because I've seen you work. I've seen you transform yourself from someone who played for empty rooms to someone who commands stages. You've earned this, David. Now you just have to go claim it. Brussels in June was beautiful. The city glowed with summer light. Cafes spilled onto sidewalks, and everywhere David looked, there was art and music and culture. The International Piano Competition was held at the Palais des Beaux-Arts, a stunning Art Deco building that had hosted some of the greatest musicians in history. David stood outside it the day before his first round, looking up at the architecture, trying to calm the anxiety building in his chest. His phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. Meet us at the hotel restaurant for dinner. 7 p.m. No excuses. The hotel was 5-star luxury, paid for by Vincent despite David's protests. When David arrived at the restaurant, he found Vincent's entire family waiting. Maria, Michael, Anthony, and Isabella all dressed up for a nice meal. Isabella ran to him when she spotted him, throwing her arms around his waist. We got here this morning. Daddy let us sleep on the plane, and we saw the ocean from the sky. That sounds amazing. Vincent stood and shook David's hand, but the gesture was warm rather than formal. You look nervous. I am nervous. Don't be. You've prepared for this. You're ready. Over dinner, they talked about everything except the competition. Maria told stories about the kids' reactions to seeing Brussels for the first time. Michael and Anthony argued about which museum they wanted to visit. Isabella showed David a charm bracelet she bought, each charm representing something important to her. This one's a piano, she said, pointing to a tiny silver charm. For you. So when you play tomorrow, I'll have piano magic to send you. David felt his throat close up. Thank you, Isabella. That means a lot. After dinner, Vincent walked David back to his room. Tomorrow's the first round, Vincent said. 40 competitors. They'll cut it to 20 after tomorrow, then to 10 for the semifinals, and 3 for the finals. I know the format. I'm telling you this not to make you nervous, but to remind you what you're up against. These are the best pianists in the world, people who've been preparing for this their entire lives. I know, but here's what they don't have. Vincent stopped walking and turned to face David. They don't have your story. They don't know what it's like to lose everything and claw your way back. They haven't played piano at 2 a.m. in empty concert halls because the music was the only thing keeping them alive. Vincent's eyes were intense. You have something those other pianists will never have. You have soul. You have truth. You have the ability to make people feel something when you play. That's what wins competitions, David. Not just technical perfection, but the ability to make the judges forget their judging. What if I mess up? Then you mess up and you keep playing. Because that's what professionals do. They don't quit when things get hard. Vincent placed both hands on David's shoulders. I believe in you. My family believes in you. But most importantly, you need to believe in yourself. David nodded, unable to speak. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. The first round required each competitor to play a 20-minute program of their choosing. David had selected pieces that showcased both technical brilliance and emotional depth: Chopin's Ballade No. 4, Scriabin's Etude in D-sharp minor, and Ravel's Undine. He was scheduled to play in the afternoon session. The morning was torture, practicing in his hotel room, trying to eat breakfast even though his stomach was churning, checking and rechecking his formal concert attire. At 1 p.m., he arrived at the Palais des Beaux-Arts. The backstage area was crowded with other competitors, all of them looking nervous and determined. David recognized several faces from recordings and YouTube videos. These were musicians who'd won other competitions, who had recording contracts and international reputations. And here he was, a former janitor who'd only been performing professionally for 8 months. David Chun. He turned to find a young woman with a clipboard. You're scheduled to play at 2:15. Please be ready to go on stage at 2:10. The wait was excruciating. David sat in the green room, listening to the other competitors through the audio monitor. They were all exceptional, technically flawless, musically sophisticated. At 2:10, the stage manager came to get him. You're up. David walked onto the stage and was immediately blinded by lights. The audience was invisible beyond the glare, but he knew they were there. 500 music lovers, dozens of journalists, and somewhere in the darkness, Vincent and his family. The piano was a Steinway Model D, the same instrument he'd practiced on at the Opera House. David sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. Then he closed his eyes and played. The Chopin flowed from his fingers like water, each note perfect and clear. The Scriabin blazed with technical fireworks that made the audience gasp. And the Ravel shimmered with a delicate touch that separated good pianists from great ones. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then applause. Not polite, not perfunctory, but genuine appreciation from an audience that recognized something special. David stood and bowed, then walked off stage on shaking legs. Vincent was waiting in the wings. He didn't say anything, just pulled David into a brief, fierce hug that said everything words couldn't. Underscore, 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 underscore. Underscore, 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 underscore. The results were announced that evening. 20 names out of 40. David Chun was number 17 on the list. He'd made it to the second round. Vincent took everyone out to celebrate, a restaurant that specialized in Belgian chocolate desserts. Isabella ate so much she fell asleep at the table, and Maria had to carry her back to the hotel. Tomorrow you rest, Vincent told David. Day after tomorrow is round 2. That's when things get serious. The second round required a 45-minute program, including at least one piece from the 20th century. David had chosen Prokofiev's Sonata No. 7, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written, along with Beethoven's Sonata No. 32 and Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse. But something was nagging at him. All of these pieces were impressive. All of them showed his technical skill. But did they show who he was? That night, David called Elena Volkov in the United States. How did round 1 go? I made it through. But Elena, I need to change my program for round 2. There was a pause. Change it how? The pieces I chose are safe. They show I can play the standard repertoire. But they don't show what makes me different from every other pianist here. What are you thinking? David explained his idea. Elena was quiet for a long time. That's risky. Very risky. I know, but it might also be brilliant. If you pull it off. She paused. David, you've worked too hard to play it safe now. If you're going to do this, commit completely. No half measures. After they hung up, David texted Vincent. Change my program for round 2. Hope you trust me. The response came immediately. Always. Underscore 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 underscore. The second round was even more intense than the first. David watched from backstage as the other competitors performed. They were all exceptional, playing the standard warhorses with technical mastery and musical sophistication. When it was David's turn, he walked onto the stage and announced his program change to the judges. I'll be performing 3 pieces. First, Frederick Rzewski's The People United Will Never Be Defeated, a complete set of 36 variations. Then, George Gershwin's The Man I Love, arranged for solo piano. And finally, an original composition titled Resurrection. The judges looked surprised. Rzewski was modern, political, rarely performed in competitions. Gershwin was jazz, not classical. And performing an original composition in a competition was almost unheard of. But David didn't give them time to object. He simply began to play. The Rzewski was a marathon, nearly 40 minutes of continuous playing, each variation more demanding than the last. It was a piece about revolution and hope, about ordinary people fighting for dignity. David played it with the passion of someone who'd lived on the margins of society, who understood what it meant to fight for survival. The Gershwin was a complete tonal shift, jazz harmonies and swing rhythms transformed for classical piano. It was playful and romantic and utterly unexpected in this context. And then the original composition, Resurrection, was David's story told in music. It started in darkness, dissonant chords representing poverty and loss. Slowly, a melody emerged. Fragile at first, then growing stronger. The music built, and built until it blazed with hope and possibility, ending on a triumphant chord that seemed to hang in the air forever. When David finished, he sat with his hands on the keys, emotionally spent. The audience was absolutely silent. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, someone started clapping. Slow, measured applause that grew as others joined in. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet. The judges were conferring quietly. David couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw surprise on their faces. He'd broken the unwritten rules of competition playing. He'd taken a massive risk. He walked off stage, unsure whether he'd just secured his place in the finals or eliminated himself from contention. Vincent was waiting, as always. That was either genius or suicide, Vincent said. I know. I loved it. Underscore 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 underscore. The results took longer to announce this time. The judges deliberated for 3 hours while competitors paced and worried and second-guessed every note they'd played. Finally, the list appeared. 10 names. The finalists who would compete for the top 3 prizes. David Chun was number 4. He'd made it to the finals. Vincent's family erupted in celebration. Isabella hugged him, so hard he almost fell over. Maria was crying. Even Michael and Anthony, who'd been skeptical about spending their summer vacation at a piano competition, were cheering. That night, Vincent took David to a quiet bar away from the competition crowds. Finals are in 2 days, Vincent said. Full concerto with orchestra. 1 hour of music that will determine your entire future. I'm aware of the stakes. Are you? Because this isn't just about winning anymore, David. This is about announcing to the world who you are as an artist. What you stand for. What you believe music can do. Vincent leaned forward. You've already won, in every way that matters. You got your life back. You proved that talent and determination can overcome almost anything. But now you have a chance to do something bigger. To show people that music isn't just entertainment. It's transformation. It's healing. It's hope. What if I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility? You became ready the moment you chose to play Resurrection in the second round. The moment you decided to tell your truth instead of playing it safe. Vincent's eyes were intense. David, I didn't invest in you because I wanted you to be just another talented pianist. I invested in you because I believed you could change how people think about what music means. David felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. I'm scared. Good. Fear means you understand what's at stake. But don't let fear make you small. Let it make you brave. The finals required each of the 10 remaining competitors to perform a complete piano concerto with the Brussels Philharmonic. David had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece he played alone in the opera house that first night Vincent heard him. The day of the finals, David woke up at dawn. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Could barely sit still. He went for a walk through Brussels, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The city was waking up around him, shops opening, cafes brewing their first pots of coffee, early morning joggers making their way through parks. His phone rang. Vincent, where are you? Walking. Trying to clear my head. Meet me at Parc du Cinquantenaire in 20 minutes. When David arrived, he found Vincent sitting on a bench overlooking a fountain. The morning light made everything golden. Sit, Vincent said. They sat in silence for a while, watching the city wake up. My father used to tell me that the most important moments in life are the ones where you have to choose between who you are and who you're afraid of becoming, Vincent said finally. Tonight, you're going to stand in front of thousands of people and make that choice. What if I choose wrong? There is no wrong choice. There's only authentic or inauthentic. And you, David Chun, are the most authentic person I've ever met. Vincent turned to look at him. That's why I chose you. Not because you were the most talented janitor I'd ever heard, but because you couldn't help being exactly who you are, even when it would have been easier to hide. David felt tears threatening. I don't want to let you down. You couldn't let me down if you tried. Win or lose tonight, you've already given me something I thought was impossible. What's that? Hope. For myself. For what I can become. For what the future might hold. Vincent smiled. You reminded me that redemption isn't a single moment. It's a series of choices, and I'm grateful for that. They sat until the sun was fully up, neither needing to say anything more. The finals began at 8 p.m. The Palais des Beaux-Arts was packed with over 2,000 people. Media from around the world. Music critics who could make or break careers with a single review. And in the third row, Vincent Castellano with his family, all dressed in their finest, ready to witness something extraordinary. David was scheduled to play last. He had to sit backstage for 3 hours, listening to the other competitors perform their concertos. They were all brilliant, technically perfect, musically sophisticated. By the time his name was called, David's hands were shaking. He walked onto the stage, and the audience applauded politely. The conductor, a distinguished gentleman in his 70s, shook his hand. Good luck, young man. Give us something to remember. David sat at the piano and looked out at the audience. He couldn't see faces beyond the lights, but he knew they were there, judging, evaluating, waiting to see if he was worthy. The orchestra began the opening theme. Soft, melancholic, building slowly toward the piano's entrance. David placed his hands on the keys and began to play. He played for his grandmother, who'd given up everything so he could pursue music. He played for the years of poverty and struggle that had nearly destroyed him. He played for Vincent, who'd seen past the janitor's uniform to the artist underneath. He played for Isabella and her piano magic. He played for everyone who'd ever given up on their dreams and wondered if it was too late to try again. The first movement was longing made audible. The second was grief transformed into beauty. And the third was pure, unstoppable joy. When David played the final chords, he felt something inside him break open. All the pain, all the fear, all the doubt, it poured out through his fingers and into the music, and when it was gone, what remained was pure light. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the audience exploded. People were on their feet screaming, crying. The orchestra members were tapping their music stands so hard it sounded like thunder. The conductor was wiping tears from his eyes. David stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. He looked out into the audience and finally spotted Vincent's family. Isabella was jumping up and down. Maria had her hand over her heart. Michael and Anthony were cheering like they were at a football game. And Vincent was standing absolutely still, tears streaming down his face, applauding with his hands held high above his head. The judges deliberated for 45 minutes. When they returned, the head judge took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this has been one of the most extraordinary competitions in our history. Every finalist performed at the highest level, but there can be only 3 winners." He announced third place, a pianist from South Korea who played Beethoven's Emperor Concerto flawlessly. He announced second place, a Russian pianist who'd made Prokofiev sound like it had been written specifically for her. And the winner of the first prize at the International Piano Competition in Brussels. David felt time slow down, felt his heart hammering in his chest, felt Vincent's belief and Isabella's hope and his grandmother's memory all converging on this single moment. David Chun, from the United States. The world exploded. Confetti fell from the ceiling. The audience roared. Cameras flashed like lightning. And David stood on that stage, holding a trophy that represented everything he thought was lost forever, and knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. Vincent fought his way through the crowd backstage. When he reached David, he didn't say anything. He just pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than any words could express. "You did it," Vincent finally whispered. "You actually did it." "We did it," David corrected. "None of this happens without you. No, this was all you. I just gave you the chance. You're the one who turned it into magic." Isabella appeared, and David scooped her up. "Did you use your piano magic? So much piano magic. And it worked." Maria hugged him next, then the boys, and suddenly David was surrounded by Vincent's family, his family, all of them celebrating like this victory belonged to all of them. Because in a way it did. The after-party lasted until 3 a.m. Journalists wanted interviews. Other competitors wanted to congratulate him. Offers started coming in from recording labels, concert halls, festivals around the world. But the moment David treasured most came near the end of the night, when the crowd had thinned and he found himself alone with Vincent on a balcony overlooking Brussels. "What happens now?" David asked. Now you become who you were always meant to be. You tour the world. You record albums. You inspire the next generation of musicians." Vincent paused. "You live the life your grandmother dreamed for you. And you? What do you do?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I keep finding people worth investing in. I keep trying to balance the scales. I keep hoping that maybe, just maybe, the good I create can outweigh the bad I've done." "It already has," David said firmly. "You gave me back my life. That's not nothing, Vincent. That's everything." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Vincent asked. "What?" "I get to watch you succeed. I get to see you become extraordinary. And every time you perform, every time you move someone with your music, I get to remember that I was part of making that possible." Vincent smiled. "That's better than any empire I could build. That's legacy worth having." David felt his eyes burning. "Thank you. For everything. For believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. For giving me a second chance. For becoming my family." "You're welcome. But David..." Vincent's expression grew serious. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when you're famous and successful and touring the world, you'll remember this feeling. And someday, when you meet someone who's lost and broken and talented, you'll give them what I gave you. A chance." "I promise." "Good." Vincent checked his watch. "It's almost dawn. We should get back to the hotel. Tomorrow's going to be a circus. Press conferences, photo shoots, contract negotiations. You ready for that?" "No, but I'll figure it out." "That's the spirit." Vincent headed toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. When we get back to the States, there's someone I want you to meet. His name is Marcus. He works security for me. But he used to play saxophone before life got in the way. I'm thinking maybe it's time someone gave him a second chance too." David smiled. "I'd be happy to help. I thought you might say that. Come on, let's go get some rest. You've earned it." As they walked back through the empty party venue, past the trophy that would change David's life, past the promises of fame and success, and everything he dreamed of, David realized something profound. He'd won the competition, but the real victory had happened months ago, at 2 a.m. in an empty concert hall, when a broken janitor played piano for an audience of one, and a man who dealt in violence chose to create beauty instead. Everything else was just applause. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love the story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.